Simply Nice, Episode 3.
Welcome back to another episode of Simply Knives with Brackin Blades Forge. In today's episode, we are going to be making a Brackin. A Brackin is a knife much like a Tanto, but without all the ornamental fittings. It's a lot simpler, it's a lot easier to make, and it can be made full tang. We're going to be making a combat Brackin. So today, we are going to use a piece of 8670 to build our knives. 8670 is my favorite steel. It can be purchased at Pop's Knife Supply. Really good company and cool guys. Really like the steel. Works out great and heat treat. So we are going to be free-forming this Brackin a little bit. I'm going to take some blue Dykem. I'm going to paint the steel, and then I'm just going to start drawing out and kind of tracing out the shape that I want. I've got a couple of things in mind that I want to put into this blade, but I need to make sure I can do everything I need to do. Now we decided to go with the full 25 centimeters, 10 inches right here, and I am excited to make this knife. Let's dive in. Okay, so I've got my scribing tool again, and what I'm going to be doing is just scribing a few lines this way to help me have some visual references when I start drawing out the handle and drawing out the tip and the profile of the blade. So I'm just going to scratch in those lines so that I have some, kind of like a grid, like when you're using a graphing grid and you're kind of drawing and designing on that. Is very similar to what I'm going to make here. Now that I've got my drawing on my steel, I'm going to go to the grinder and start grinding away the excess material to where I have my good profiled shape. So, now we have ground the profile to our combat Brackin. The next thing that I'm going to do is to get my center punch and mark where I want my pinholes and my lanyard hole on the handle. And then we're going to go to the drill press and drill all of these out to the appropriate sizes. This isn't a very long step. It's not a very hard step. So I'm going to speed it up and just let you guys kind of follow along. Now, the only one of these steps that I really say is required, because we're putting handle scales on the knife, is going to be drilling the pinholes. The other thing where I'm drilling out the handle to make it lighter was just a preference, and if you prefer to do that, you can do it as well. So here we are. So we drilled these extra holes in the handle to just alleviate some of the weight. It feels really, really good now. We're going to alleviate some of the weight when we grind the bevels as well. And then I used a countersink tool to bevel all of the holes, which just gives it a really good, nice, clean finish. So the next thing we're going to do is go to our grinder. We're going to grind out our bevels, and we're going to grind in this really cool kind of false edge on the top to just create a different look and effect on the blade. Another thing to note, I found this really awesome pin when I was looking for some pin material for the knife. I measured the pinhole with the drill hole, and as always, it barely fits, really, really tight. So what you're going to want to make sure you do is, after you quench this, come back with a Dremel and just barely clean up the hole, because this is a really good fit. It doesn't fall out. That's kind of how snug you want it, but I don't want it too snug. All right, so there you have the final grind. I have all the lines in the same direction down the spine, on the little triangular piece of the tang, down the other side of the tang. I've got to hand sand the blade to where it's all straight. The lines go this direction. And then same with this little piece right here. Hand sand it. So all the lines go in the same direction. And then we're going to heat treat. This thing looks awesome. Now it's important here when you're hand sanding and doing the final sanding that you want to get all the lines going in the same direction. Sanding with a hard piece of metal will help this process and keep the knife flat. As you can see, I've got a little bitty mark from the grinder, and I'm going to do my best to get it out, but I am stone washing this knife, so if it doesn't come out, it will be covered up by the stone wash. Why did that happen? Well, I heard a noise when I was grinding this knife and it kind of made me jump. And that's just part of it. Not going to restart, just going to keep going. Alright, so I quenched it a little bit differently. I put it in the oil, pulled it out, and created a giant fireball. Why did I do this? One simple reason. It's not necessary, but it looks cool. Leave your blade in the oil till it's completely cooled, and then pull it out. Enough said. Now you'll see again in this video that I'm torch tempering this knife. This is not something that I recommend for beginners. If you are going to attempt it, you need a laser to be able to read your temperatures. So, we are going to do a stone wash finish on this knife. Now we've already oil finished it, which means I just put oil on it and then I torched it and quenched it in water so that the oil would dry on black. And that's how we get this nice dark finish on it. And now we're going to put it into our wonderful rock shaker, and we are going to give this thing a nice speckled stone wash finish. All right, so we have our knife stone washed, and my arms are really tired. There's a lot of better ways to stone wash, but this is the method and the way that I have to stone wash, so this is what I'm gonna keep using. And I like how it turned out. It's nice and faint, doesn't look overly done, looks really good. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this forest green G10 handle material. We're gonna trace out our handles, and then we're going to put where we're gonna be putting our pinholes. We're gonna cut and drill this material and get it all cleaned up before it gets glued on. I would say there's no right or wrong way to cut out your handle scales. Just stay away from your scribe lines. Now when you're refining the profile of your handle scales, it's important you don't grind over the scribe line. Grind to the scribe line and we can clean it up later. Just get the general basic shape of the handle scale down to the scribe line and then clean it up. Take your time with this step, don't rush it because it can create sloppy results. Okay, so now we've cleaned up our handle scales. We've got them all the way down to the scored line that we made. The next thing that we need to do is cut this and clean this up for where our lanyard hole is. And we also need to clean this area up so that it looks nice and transition wells with this area on the knife, the ricasso/bolster area. So how are we going to do that? Well, I had a subscriber reach out to me and ask me to go into more depth on my handle process. So the simplest way I can do it is to just show you through a time lapse and voiceover with the time lapse, but I'll go ahead and give you a couple of key elements right now. One of the things I do is get to this point. This is one of the most important points to get to, where this knife fits really snug with the scales on it without having to go to the grinder. All right, so I'll fit it up and show you what I mean. So see, this knife is virtually ready to just sand the corners down and glue on. This is the point that I want to get to with every single one of my knives. before I start gluing it together. And I'm not even going to glue it together yet. So now that you've got everything marked out the way that you want it to, everything fits up good, go ahead and put your pins in, line up the handle, and then clamp it real tight so it doesn't want to slip and move on you before you go to the grinder.
Again, grind straight to the scribe line, and then don't go over the scribe line. Another really helpful tip is if you're working on a knife you like, which hopefully you like all the knives you work on, use sharp belts. The sharp belts will help you be more precise and more accurate and give you cleaner results than not a sharp belt.
So now I'm just going to clean up the rest of this scribe line ever so slightly and keep fitting up with the knife handle till it fits flush. When this thing goes on the knife, I want to make sure that that's it. I don't want to have to do any more sanding on these. So one of the best ways to do this is to use a flat surface and some sandpaper and just sand till it's done. If you're really good on a machine, you can use a machine if you like.
The important thing to note here as I'm sanding these handle scales is to watch and see how many times I stop and fit them up to the knife. What I'm trying to do is ensure that these are exactly the same width as the tang on the knife before proceeding to the next step.
Alright, so now you'll see our handles fit up very smoothly. Click fit almost. So our handles fit in nice and smoothly. This one needs to be driven in with a hammer. That's okay, because I want it nice and tight. But all of this area is smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and finish sand those up to 400 grit. Same on the front. Same on the back. Then I'm going to glue it up. Alright, so once you're at this point and the knife is glued up, I'm going to let you know another little trick. Let it sit just long enough until it is tacky, where you can start to pull it off and it pulls off the metal. What this will do is will prevent you from having to do any cleanup on the epoxy later on. I used to let the epoxy fully dry and then grind away the material, and for some knives I still do that. But when I'm doing a knife like this where the handles need to be fit perfectly to the tang before I go to the grinder, I like to leave the glue until it's nice and tacky, and then I'll go peel it off, and it just peels right off real easily.
So as you can see here, I am using something to assist in scraping the epoxy off. It just helps me get underneath the epoxy. You can use a fingernail, box blade, screwdriver, or even a piece of antler.
Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is go to the grinder, and I'm going to be flat grinding the handle scales on the flat platen. Now what I'm going to do is go through and do the angles as well, the back, the sides, and the front, on all the sides until it is a good consistent finish. I will do this from a 60 grit to a 120 grit, and then to a 220 grit, and then the rest of the grits, I will hand sand this out.
The things to pay attention to when doing a geometrically shaped handle is to take your time and watch the angle at which you approach the flat platen. Don't rush, you'll get it right, just go slow. So my only real tips that I have for when it comes to hand sanding is take your time again. Don't use old sandpaper. When the sandpaper gunks up, get rid of it, get a new piece, and then make sure that you sand through one grit until all the scratches are consistent across the knife handle.
Thank you for watching another episode of Simply Knives with Brackin Blades Forge. If you would, hit the like button, subscribe button, and bell notification button if you would like to see more Simply Knives videos. Today, we made Combat Kwaikin. Now, we've got to test the sharpness. I really trust the strength and durability of this knife. I'm not going to take it through any sort of crazy testing, because today was really to focus on the handle making portion of the knife. just so you guys know, is it sharp? I think it'll cut.